Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the back doors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Melinda Barkhouse-Ross. Children of the Night, bloodlust, carnal desires, suave, sophisticated, and unearthly attractive, pale skin, sensitivity to daylight, romantic, sexy, violent, and dangerous, killers, predators, unforgiving hunters once they've found their mark, true beings of evil. To them, humanity is a disease. We are cattle, or beloved and enchanting. However you prefer your vampire, that is how you can play as one in Vampire The Masquerade. White Wolf has released the latest edition of the RPG Vampire The Masquerade, which can be played as a LARP or around a table with friends and a few dice. If you've never played Vampire The Masquerade before, never fear. This new edition, at first glance, seems to be a bit more streamlined, well, not simplified exactly. Your game master, with a little bit of prep, should be able to run a game easily enough. In today's episode, I'm going to indulge in a bit of vampire folklore, and then we will use that as a launching pad to get into the masquerade. So, vampires. Beings with this name or slight variants show up all through human history. It's fascinating exactly how many cultures have managed to find and curate similar explanations for things they don't understand. The process the human body endures after death leads to the pallid skin of the vampire we know today. But in some cultures, this isn't the case. Their skin was often dark and ruddy. Sometimes the vampire was merely a trickster playing pranks on the family members in the villages where they used to live. The Persians were one of the first civilizations to have tales of blood-drinking beings. Creatures attempting to drink blood from men have been found on ancient pottery. Ancient Babylonia had tales synonymous with and giving rise to Lilith and her daughters. Lilitu was a demon and was often depicted as drinking and surviving on the blood of babies. And Estri, female shape-shifting blood-drinking demons, were said to roam the night among the population seeking victims. The charismatic and sophisticated vampire of modern fiction was born in 1819 with the publication of The Vampire by English writer John Polidori. Although originally this book was mistakenly accredited to Lord Byron, both Byron and Polidori affirmed that the story is Polidori's. The story was highly successful and arguably the most influential vampire work of the early 19th century. Bram Stoker's 1987 novel, of course, Dracula, is remembered as the quintessential vampire novel and has provided the basis for the modern vampire legend, even though it was published after Joseph Sheridan Le Fano's 1872 novel, Carmilla. The success of this book spawned a distinctive vampire genre, still popular in the 21st century with books, films, television shows, and video games. The vampire has since become a dominant figure in the horror genre. You could even say romantic horror genre. And I would be probably in significant amounts of trouble if I didn't stop for a second to talk about Anne Rice here as well. Rice's books have sold nearly 100 million copies, placing her among the most popular authors in recent American history. While reaction to her early works was initially mixed, she became more popular with critics and readers in the 1980s. Her writing style and the literary content of her works have been analyzed by literary commentators. Her stories of Lestat and his escapades gave birth to 2 films and to a television show that is currently in the works, with Rice and her son Christopher among the writers and producers of the show. However, it was none of the authors here who gave me my first glimpse into vampire lore. Perhaps it's also responsible for a part of my love of Dungeons and Dragons. My first vampire of note was Strad von Zarovich, a perfectly flawed man who became a wonderfully dark vampire, whose obsession led to his infamy. Once the Ravenloft books were bought by Dragonlance, Strad was lost until his resurrection in the Dungeons & Dragons universe in The Curse of Strad, which, despite my best efforts, I still haven't managed to play through to completion. But I digress. Another topic perhaps for another day. White Wolf Publishing was an American role-playing game and book publisher. The company was founded in 1991 as a merger between Lion Rampant and White Wolf Magazine. They then merged with CCP Games in 2006. White Wolf Publishing operated as an imprint of CCP but ceased in-house production of any material, instead licensing their properties to other publishers. It was announced in late 2015 that White Wolf had been acquired from CPP by Paradox Interactive. In November of 2018, most of its staff were dismissed for making controversial statements. It was announced that White Wolf would no longer function as an entity separate from Paradox Interactive. White Wolf Publishing, the company behind Vampire the Masquerade, a classic tabletop role-playing game, is caught up with an explosive controversy. A story widely circulated online accused White Wolf of marketing its products to consumers who align themselves with neo-Nazi and white supremacist ideology. White Wolf responded to strenuously deny those claims. In a live question and answer session on Twitch, White Wolf's Jason Carl, producer on V5, confronted the issue directly. You can still find the video online if you would like to watch it. But in the video, Jason Carl says, White Wolf is a very diverse team, and we feel that we are a global company and we have a global community, and that everyone is welcome in our community, unless you are a Nazi or a neo-Nazi or a member of any other hate group that uses these disgusting philosophies to advance your hateful agendas. If you are a member of one of those groups or support those agendas, we don't want you in our community. You aren't welcome, and if we find you spreading your hate in our community, you will be shown the door. We don't want your money. You can keep it. So, with that said, you should know that you will still find the passage neo-Nazi claiming to be alt-right in the write-up for the Bruja clan in even the second edition of the book, which is what I have for version 5. Remember, this is a game where you are exploring evil intentions and evil itself. You really don't need to be a Nazi to do it in the world of Vampire. There are far more interesting ways to do that. If a player tried it at my table, I would not so politely ask them to leave. Never forget, you are in control of who sits at your table, and you are responsible for the content of your game. Speaking from my D&D Dungeon Master experience, I will always recommend that you have content warning discussions before your session 0. It's easy to do as a game master. For the girls that sit around my table, I created a Google Doc sheet with a list of things that could be upsetting to players. And each player who was going to be involved in the campaign anonymously went onto the document and just put a little X by the things that they didn't want to see in the games. Once everybody is around the table, you can go over the topics that will be avoided, and this is a great time to ask if anyone has anything that they would like to add to the list. It's easy, and it will make your gaming experience a more comfortable one, and everyone around the table will feel respected and heard. I can even share the document on the GSMC Sci-Fi Twitter if you want to grab it and use it and save it as a template for one of your games. After the break, I'm going to be joined by someone who has been an enthusiastic player of Vampire the Masquerade. We'll walk you through a few of the changes and get his perspective on them. We'll be right back with the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's GSMCpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
welcome back to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast. I'm your host, Melinda Barkhouse-Ross, and I want to welcome to my wonderful studio, Rob Ross. Rob, welcome to our closet, aka my studio.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome to the show. Rob is my husband. Rob is also one of the most experienced Vampire the Masquerade players that I currently know in my life. So I thought this would be a great time, since we're under quarantine, to force Rob to be part of the show. So thanks.
You're very welcome.
Okay. So Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, we managed to get a couple of games in. I don't want to start at the 5th edition. I want to start with your evolution in Vampire, how you were brought into it. Tell us a little bit about the character that you used to play. I know you're very proud of him. So let's start with where you found Vampire the Masquerade.
I actually went to school with a bunch of actors and directors in the neighborhood playhouse that was in New York City. It's made from the Meisner Acting School. And, you know, being a poor actor in New York City, you kind of find ways to have fun. My two roommates were really into it. There were two brothers, one a writer, director, the other one an actor. And they almost kind of hid it from me, like they were playing a game, and I kind of walked in, and there were, you know, lots of papers and pencils and spreadsheets. And, of course, I was curious, like, what are you guys doing? And they sheepishly told me about the game, and I'd never role-played before. I'd never played D&D or anything like that. And for the better part of 3 years, we played a lot of Vampire, because it's cheap to do, and once you own the books and kind of have a basic understanding how to do it, it's a lot of fun on a Saturday night when you're broke.
Tell us a bit about your character.
I played a bunch, but one of my longest-running characters was Destin Bella. That's almost embarrassing now. But he was a club owner in Chicago. Toreador, there's a bunch of different types of vampires within this thing. Just like in D&D, like, you know, you have a warrior, or you have like a barbarian, or whatever have you. This is someone that relies on their presence, like what's attractive about them. They're very attracted to things, and they kind of walk through as the classic, maybe interview with the vampire type vampire. Okay.
Can you tell us a little bit about the story arc that Mr. Bella had to go through?
Well, he started as a very pretty boy club owner, really no responsibilities. There was a large amount of, you know, things about the vampiric world that he didn't know. So as he goes throughout, he kind of sees the rougher side of what it is to be a kindred, what it is to be a vampire, what really moves the scenes. It's not all just, you know, seducing women and making money and running a club and just being the most fabulous person in the room. It's more of a, you know, nitty-gritty. One thing you got to remember about vampires, these things aren't heroes. They're not, you know, they're not your classic, I'm going to come in and save the day with sword wielding. These are people that are, by definition, damned. You know what I mean? They are broken souls that really have very few ways of redemption. So through his own story, he does find, throughout years and years of playing, he did find a way of redemption. But he's always a flawed character, and I think that if you've made a vampire character that is purely heroic, I don't know if you're really reading the text correctly.
Okay, so you've played through that game. You've played through Destin, right? Okay. And you found haphazardly, even by mistake, your gaming partners. Did more people end up joining the game as you guys played on, or was this strictly like a need-to-know basis?
Oh, no, we were closet nerds, man. You know, you really don't. You're like, hey, yeah, man. Well, actually, it did come through. We ended up playing Werewolf, which is another piece of White Wolf lore. It all fills into the original canon of Vampire the Masquerade. You had that, you had Wraith, you had magic, you had it all kind of fits together. So we started adding more of those pieces, and we happened to be going through a werewolf campaign. And one of our friends came over one day when we were, you know, enjoying a little bit too much wine and started talking about it, and he got very much into it. He's just another actor and buddy of us. I think that's one of the things that made it so much fun is we were just surrounded by people that were, you know, very into improv, very into voice acting, into writing a script and carrying out a character. But you don't need to have any of those things to make it enjoyable with your friends. You know, this is something that you can do with no one having any kind of acting ability at all. You know, just enjoying your friends and having a laugh. You know, it is something that once you buy the book, you have hours and hours and hours of free entertainment.
Okay, so I guess the next thing that we need to talk about a little bit is, you mean, and you touched on it, in that the world of the Masquerade, there's not really a hero archetype exactly, and it does tend to deal a little bit more with the shadier side, or the more, I don't even know what the word is I'm looking for, but the bad side of really what we know as humanity, right?
Yeah, this is definitely not the sparkly vampires. This is, I mean, like as in any of these games, you can play any of the D&Ds or any of it and pick it up and play it however you'd like. So I'm not saying that like to play one way is wrong and to play another way is right, but definitely the literature gives you more of a dark look. It is almost like Warhammer: The Grim Darkness, just with less machine guns and space. These are tragically built characters. You know, I mean, when you wake up in the middle, you know, for your nights out, you start off craving blood. You know, that's just part of it. Your actions aren't, I'm going to be valiant today. I mean, you can play it that way. I mean, like, that's one of the greatest things about role-playing games. It's up to you how you want your character to be. But maybe if you're a character that is trying to be valiant, something interesting could be what he's fighting against internally. Like, is he fighting against his hunger? Is it difficult for him to, you know, not kill his victim? Is there some kind of class flaw that makes that exceptionally difficult? Why does he still want to hold on to his humanity? Like, does he have a family still? Is he like a young vampire and just is in love with his wife and trying to make this vampiric life work and let her not know? Like, maybe he's a bartender, so maybe it's not that obvious. You know what I mean? Like, so there's a billion and one stories that you can tell, and that's one of the reasons I like it so much, because there is an emphasis on the brutality of internal horror versus like the brutality of external stimulus. Like, what would make you yourself, the listener, like, what would make the beast erupt in you? You know, like, what is that thing that you kind of push down all the time, maybe at work or at the shopping mall, or someone's taking too long in line or whatever have you? Like, what if that was something that was specifically able to trigger, like, let's say you had the power to dominate, which is like you can just force someone to do what you can do. What if you actually had that and, like, you're on your last nerve and this person is just taking their time in the line? Would you use it? Would you not? What would be the repercussions? You know, that kind of thing.
When you had your first look at the new Vampire book, and when I look at your second edition book in comparison to the V5, which is what they're officially calling it, it's like doubled in size.
Well, one of the reasons it's doubled is because the art is so beautiful. It's probably the prettiest book I've ever seen for any role-playing book. So I'm not saying that they padded the covers with the art. I think that it works really, really well. It kind of immerses you immediately, even if it's your first time going through it. Actually, they've streamlined a lot of the things, I think, in the new one. I think it's, to some degree, a little bit more user-friendly. They've complicated some of the rolling, some of the dice rolls and that kind of stuff. But I think where the original Vampire the Masquerade, you did need a little bit of the additional information. Like, they had a lot of characters that you could play, or types of characters that you could play, that you really needed the additional information to really get a grasp on them. And that's, like, in the first book, they alluded to them, and then you'd go and you'd buy the source material. In this book, it's really just a one book kind of solves all.
Up next on the GSMC Sci-Fi podcast, we are going to get into character creation with Rob.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Melinda Barkhouse-Ross. Rob is still with us, and we are going to talk character creation. Okay, so we built me a vampire to play, and I felt, and maybe it's because I'm coming from the D&D world, and I'm used to how the books are laid out, and I'm used to how the classes work and stuff like that, but I felt super lost. And you say that this is streamlined. I can't imagine. We're going to have to go back and build me a character with second edition, because to me it still felt a little bit murky and a little bit confused.
Well, I mean, it is laborious. I think that Vampire itself is a little bit more laborious than D&D. D&D, you kind of can just come in for the first time, look at the book, figure it out. Vampire kind of asks you to look inside whatever character you're looking to make. Like of how you feed and what does that equal. And it's not just dots on a page. It really does affect how your character is going to play in the story. Now, if you talk to your DM or your GM in this case, and you're like, well, this just makes the most sense, but I don't really want to know if I want to lean into it. For example, if you're a, blood bagger, that somebody that like takes bloods and resells it, or mixes it with makes somebody do some cocaine first and then sells that drug as, an additive to, vampires that are addicted to that kind of thing. You can lean into it. Like all these things are just setups to try to make the best story in between you and your friends. So there are more complicated questions that you need to ask yourself. And a lot of it is up to interpretation in comparison to D&D, which is a little bit more mathematic, not in a bad way, but it just is this, this power gives you this. There's a little bit less room, in my personal opinion, for interpretation.
Oh, you also mentioned how in V5 magic seems to be a little less prevalent in the game. Can you talk a little bit about the comparison between 2E and V5?
Sure. Yeah, they've gotten rid of a lot of classes. Now, when I say gotten rid of, I mean it's just not in the actual beginning source material. And there's stories about how they've gotten rid of the classes. For example, the Ravenos. Which was one of my favorite classes. But, there's nothing to say that you can't mix that stuff back in, especially if you already have the source material. When I ran the game, I didn't feel handicapped to be like, oh, I can't use this aspect anymore because, it's not in the current edition. I mean, the roles are mathematical and there's definitely great systems, but like you can kind of shoehorn something in from the past and make it work with the current system, or go back to the original rolling dice and use just all the rules from, this current edition. I mean, you can either have the stuff and not be afraid of fifth and just add it as like almost a companion guide, something cool, you know what I mean? But magic, magic has taken a little bit of a backseat through the Tremere and some of the stuff that they can do and the Setites. I know I'm just throwing a lot of words at you that maybe you don't know, but those are classes that used to be in the game. The Tremere is still there, but they seem to have shifted away from their cabal kind of feeling from the beginning. I think in a positive way, though, Vampire used to be a lot about who your sire was, especially with the Tremere, for example. They were like, you kind of were obligated to do what the person ahead of you said. This kind of allows all the vampires to have their own new way in the world, as like the elders kind of go into the east, which is the big mystery of what no one knows why. So those are things that you can add to it. So there's maybe more of a, like, less of a power struggle, more young people coming up through the ranks.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the character creation, because that's the part that I struggled with the most. So maybe to try to clarify that for some people. when you're coming up with a sire, they do have sire options in the book. It's towards the back. I found it accidentally after we decided that Rasputin was going to be my sire, because why not? The man who couldn't be killed and all of that. So do you have to have your sire first, or do you have to create your character with a particular sire in mind? Do you think that's an important place to start?
I think that really comes down to the character, or the person playing the character. For example, your character is a Tremere that wanted to have a famous sire, so you personally got a lot of your own lore, even looking at the dates of when he was dead and when it made sense for you to be sired and blah blah blah. What it would be like to be the child of someone like a historical figure like Rasputin. So that maybe did a really good job to influence some of your choices of how your character is going to act in the world, like your age, your generation. That gives you how much power you're going to have, this, that, and the other thing. But if you just decide to, maybe you don't even know your sire. There's a bunch of characters like Thin Bloods and whatnot, or just people that could be embraced and left to deal with their own devices. That could be just as powerful as a character creation tool as, having someone specifically like Rasputin.
Okay, so, I hate to do it because I don't want to keep confusing people between the two gaming systems, but like in D&D, right? You've got your barbarians, you have your warlocks, you have your sorcerers, you have your rogues, you have your rangers, you have your dryads, right? So you have all of these different things, and each one means something very specific. I'm finding, and maybe it's just because I have such a D&D brain right now, that there were very obvious parallels in terms of the character tropes. Like you have your what was the hippie class?
Like the gangrel, for example. That would be like your druid, essentially. Some stark differences, of course, but I mean, like, yeah, you go through that with the classes too. For example, but there's a lot of crossover. For example, you don't just have to be a rogue in D&D. Like, let's use Toreador. Those were the pretty ones I was talking about earlier. They have a lot of presence, which is something that you can control someone's emotions and reactions and memories, and or like make them essentially do what you want them to do. But they're also blessed with speed, celerity. So they can act very roguish in that nature, or they could be a swordsmith. They could be, carry around a rapier, or carry around a revolver and be able to, shoot out 3 guys in the same turn. So they could also even act like a monk. And you'll find that crossover a lot with any of the guys. Like, for example, you could have a Bruja, which would be your tank, your barbarian that you would find in Dungeons and Dragons. They can take a lot of punishment. They can push out of a lot of punishment. They can be very dominant in a circumstance, but that doesn't mean that they have to be brutish. That doesn't mean that they have to be, a certain way. You can really, because this is not built in medieval times. It can be. You can set this back into the old bloodlines, but this is, generally speaking, most people play it in the modern or near modern era. There are defined roles. There are characters that are better at doing certain things than other characters are not good at doing certain things, but I think there's a little bit more of a washover.
Okay, so and again, D&D, I'm sorry to keep doing it, but so you have multi-classing in D&D. Can you multi-clan by using your disciplines?
With the exception of Thin Bloods, because Thin Blood would be somebody that would be just recently embraced by somebody that wasn't very old. They can pick and choose and kind of like marry the things together. But other than that, the powers are kind of sweeping, and so that kind of allows you to multi-class where you want to put your 3 dots. You also can spend a large amount of points that you get throughout the game, experience points, to purchase another clan's ability. But I find it always best that you find a in-game reason to be able to learn that. Like, if you just all of a sudden on game 7, I have celerity now, like, well, it's best if you can be like, and this is how I got celerity, like, talk to your GM, you know what I mean? Like, just, if that's what you want to spend some points on, maybe he can write something into the story that makes a more natural sense for you to pick up these traits, because it's not just like, oh, I immediately do this. Like, it's better just to have somebody that can teach you that. And that's an in-game element. That's something that you can role play, or that's something that can just enrich your story.
Yeah. Up next on the GSMC Sci-Fi podcast, we are going to talk a little bit more about game mechanics, and in particular, something that they have added to the game. We'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sci-Fi podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Melinda Barkhouse-Ross, talking game mechanics. So in V5, they brought out it's even a whole new like square block that you have to fill out on your character sheet, and it deals with blood potency. And it actually has a lot to do with the game master and how the characters work when it comes to their roles and their power, really, isn't it?
It has to do with how strong your effect can be. Really, the biggest difference is going to be the new edition of Hunger Dice. Really kind of forces your character to be really sure that this is what they want to do when they're using their power. It kind of used to be willy-nilly. Like, okay, I have this much blood dice. After I run out of blood, I'm going to have problems, and then I'm going to have to refill on blood. Well, every time that you use a power of any kind, you're going to expel a blood dice. And that means that you have an additional blood dice into your pool of rolling. So then there's a critical success and a critical failure. So if one of those blood dice in your blood pool, and you don't add it to it, it just replaces one of the dice that are going to be part of that. So let's say that you had a 10 on a blood dice in your roll. And that's what you needed to succeed, and you've succeeded the roll. But because you have a 10, it's like a critical success, if you will. You will succeed, but you'll do it in a very vampiric way. So let's say that you were just trying to get somebody to move out of your way, and you were trying to dominate them. Well, your point was just to talk to them and convince them that this wasn't, this is not where you want to be. These are not the droids that you're looking for, But like when you come out of your rage, you've just crushed their skull. So yes, the person's no longer in front of you and no longer a problem, but you've done it in a very animalistic way. And the same kind of principle happens with a 1. Yes, you may fail this, but now you're going to fail it in a horrific, very, to use the word properly, horrific way to do it.
What did you find as somebody who had played Vampire before, and what did you think were some of the bigger challenges, or were there any new challenges that you saw in our very brief games that we had to play with V5?
I think that maybe the new version is almost made for people that have played the Vampire the Masquerade first, and then have now coming back to the game. Not that it's inaccessible for people that haven't, but the two big differences for me were that the first version, it was more about being that club owner, being that, power-hungry guy that owns, the Sears Tower, or it was a little bit more showboaty and less about what it would actually be to be a vampire walking around Earth and dealing with the urges and dealing with the ramifications to his actions. This book really forces you, especially with the blood dice, really forces you to deal with the repercussions. How hard would it be to never lose your cool if you owned a club? how hard would that be? And if you do see a vampire that like is in charge of a multi-million-dollar company, like think about his resolve to have never lost it in public. You know what I mean? He's never broken the masquerade. So it kind of reduces the grandeur and focuses more on what that internal horror would be of constantly battling with the worst side of yourself.
Okay, cool. I'm not going to keep you locked in the closet. You can go now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for lending your expertise to the GSMC Sci-Fi podcast.
You're welcome. Do you want me to close my door on that?
I mean, maybe. Have a great day. And I mean, for the record, we were misbehaving a little bit. We were less than 6 feet apart from each other for this interview. So maybe we now have to both shower.
Well, if you have corona, I'm fairly sure that I already have corona. So.
Yeah, and same.
Yeah, right. So stay safe out there, everybody, and make sure to wash your hands.
Right. And don't forget, you can always do your tabletop role-playing games via any of the new video conferencing stuff like Facebook Messenger.
Actually, that's something that we're all thinking of. I do have a couple people that like to play different games, and considering we can't get together right now, we are in the works of figuring out how to do this on virtual reality as it will be. So I suggest maybe if you already are a player, check that out. It's kind of fun to at least see somebody that's not your pet or significant other. Yeah, just have fun and roll out there, guys.
So a lot of what I've experienced in the gameplay so far with Vampire the Masquerade V5, especially playing Ezra Tremere, is just how different the use of magic is in the world of darkness in comparison to the D&D universe. A large part of the blood magic that comes from the Tremere clan is really useful in terms of person-to-person manipulation, but when it comes to the grandiose battle, I found that I was feeling very limited in my magic choices. Obviously, this is done on purpose, but I have felt very restricted as far as being part of bigger battle scenes. The Bruja clan does seem to be the correct choice for a first-time player, much the way that a player playing a ranger or a rogue in D&D is a great entry point for the first-time player. There are a lot of different things you can do and a lot of different ways that you can carry your character. Now, the character that I'm currently playing is Anna Rasputin. Yes, that Rasputin, the man who couldn't be killed, the man who earned the trust of the Russian Tsar and his family in the early 1900s. I felt that Rasputin had enough mystique around him and his legend that I could really grow the character out of that idea. So Anna helped Rasputin on the day of his attempted assassination, which happened in a small village by a 33-year-old woman. It's an actual historical event, and again, I didn't have to worry too much about backstory in this case, because there was nothing better that I could have created or written that was any better than the story of Rasputin. My game master, aka my husband, and he played Rasputin as a vampire who lives in an isolated part of Russia, has a harem, because again, Rasputin, and has limited knowledge of technology. In fact, part of the story is that the only reason he has a cell phone is to stay in contact with my character, Anna. Our story is set in Las Vegas, and Anna is the real magic behind a lot of the magic shows in town, as it was one night at a David Copperfield show where things started to go badly for all of the vampires of Las Vegas. Each of the players around the table had their own version of things start to go wrong. So wrong, in fact, that the masquerade ended up being broken and Vegas has fallen into chaos. That's as far as we've gotten in the game. So a part of Vampire the Masquerade is that the masquerade is what the Camarilla calls the existence of vampires and keeping that knowledge away from humans. It's the masquerade that vampires play to pass as humans. Anna Rasputin has really been a lot of fun to play, but again, I have struggled a bit with her abilities. I really wanted to be able to be a bigger part of those larger action scenes where Anna and her fellow vamps are fighting off feral vampires and humans alike. As it turns out, they are dealing with humans who have a virus that causes local vampires, newly turned thin bloods, to lose their composure. In fact, we even had a sire who fell victim to this virus. This in itself is an interesting change in the game mechanics, because in the previous editions, the vampires had an easier time keeping the beast in check, which isn't so much the case in V5, as you heard Rob talking about. The beast is more uncontrollable and less stable, making owning and running a big nightclub significantly more dangerous. But back to Anna. I really enjoyed her personality. She's just a little wacky, like just wacky enough that she gets away with speaking to her superiors with flagrant disregard for proper protocols. Truth is, they don't understand how exactly she does what she does, so she always gets a little bit more leeway than is given to most of the individuals in the party. Anna has had a number of great one-liners and gotten a lot of giggles, even a couple of guffaws around the table. And although she doesn't seem to take things very seriously, she's actually allowing the kindred around her to think that she is less than what she actually is. Playing court jester while observing and unnerving, using this as a way to recon information. As I mentioned earlier, it does seem like a lot of Anna has been built for more of the one-on-one scenario. There is no fireball-type spell in Vampire The Masquerade. You have to be creative and consider the way your actions will reverberate both for your character and for those around you. Another interesting part of the character building is selecting your flaws. Because of the Tremere clan attributes, Anna has the fame flaw, meaning there's a subsect of people who know what she is. This can be good or bad, but for the purposes of this story, it's definitely been a detriment. She also has a band of neighborhood kids who know that she's a vampire, and they're out to prove it. Think kind of like Scooby-Doo meets Stranger Things. The last game, I even managed to make one of the kids a ghoul. It's pretty twisted, right? But this is all part and parcel of Vampire. All of these things add up to this suggestion. If you get the opportunity to play Vampire, take it. Be prepared for very adult themes and personal horror situations. If you enjoy role-playing, you will like Vampire. If you like vampires, you will enjoy playing a vampire. Give V5 a shot, and let us know what you think. To continue your introduction to Vampire the Masquerade V5, I thought we would break down the clans that you can see if you decide to pick up the book. We'll get into that next on the GSMC Sci-Fi podcast.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sci-Fi podcast. I'm your host, Melinda Barkhouse-Ross, and I thought now would be a good time to indulge in a little bit more information about the clans of the game, which would be equal to classes if you are a D&D brain, okay? So we're going to start with what I think is probably the best entry point if you are getting into Vampire the Masquerade. I think that they are the easiest to play, and I think that they are probably the most flexible when it comes to what a first-time player would want to try to do in the game. And that is the Bruja, the Learned Clan, the Rabble, the Punks, the Hipsters, the Prometheans, the Rebels, the Philosopher Kings, and the Hellions. The dream of the Learned Clan is a world where injustice has been eliminated and the living and the undead can coexist in peace. They say it is for the love of mortals that they lead them against their masters. In truth, they may simply rage against a distant or non-existent god they can never fight against, a curse they can never end. Theirs is a dream that poisons everything it touches. As they infiltrate or instigate revolutions, their hunger and passion ensure that blood will flow, innocents die, and peace never be attained. Some of the things that I really enjoy about the Bruja is that they're kind of more of the, well, as it talks about in the first description, you know, they can be anything from, you know, punks to hipsters to philosopher kings and rebels. I just think that it's an interesting cross-section of people. Now, by the way, if you are going to pick up the book, this all starts on page 63. And what I really enjoy is that as they break down each of the clans, they do have pictures, 8 different variants, 4 female, 4 male, of what in terms of the creators of the game, believe that each clan would look like in appearance. So it's a great visual way for you to make a decision on which clan that you would like to play. Now, something also that I enjoy is that each clan has a clan bane. It's something that has to be taken into consideration when you're playing a member of a specific clan. The bane for the Brujah is the blood of the Brujah simmers with barely contained rage, exploding at the slightest provocation. Subtract a dice equal to the bane severity of the Brujah from any roll to resist fury frenzy. This cannot take the pool dice below 1 die. I mean, really, how could you? It's all really very simple. The disciplines that are a focus for the Brujah are celerity, the ability to move quickly, strike fast, and that kind of stuff. Potence. Brujah use potence as a devastating weapon, cutting short any confrontation with destructive finality. And presence. It's a presence to win the hearts of the crowd and turn a threatening mob against itself or send a dangerous opponent fleeing into the night. I do enjoy Brujah with good presence. They're like your... the person at a rally with the bullhorn who's getting everybody fired up. That would be the Brujah. So the next clan is the Gangrel, a clan of the beast, animals, ferals, savages, barbarians, outcasts, wolves, and strays. A hunger older than mankind burns inside the wolves when other kindred curse their appetites and choose a gilded cage of a city and the leash of social hierarchy. The wolves accept the beast as part of themselves and run free, crossing borders between species, nations, and domains with the ease of a perfect predator. They belong in the wild, and the wild belongs to them. To think of them as noble savages is perilous, as the animal has little respect for the arrogance of civilization, and only the strongest survive their bloody hunts and savage initiations, trading stories of war and the secret histories of their kind from around campfires lit with the bones of their oppressors. They have turned their backs on the Camarilla and fight tooth and claw to escape the endless plots of their fellow kindreds. These guys are pretty neat. I haven't really looked a whole lot into the Gangrel, but the bane of them is related so much to their beast as other kindred relate to the Gangrel. Suspicious partnership is what they're kind of dealing with. In Frenzy, Gangrel gain one more animal feature, a physical trait, a smell, or a behavioral tie. These features last for one more night after, lingering like a hangover following a night of debauchery. Each feature reduces one attribute by 1 point. The storyteller may decide that a forked tongue or a bear-like musk reduces charisma, while bat-like ears reduce resolve. If nothing immediately occurs to you, the feature reduces intelligence or manipulation. The number of features a Gangrel manifests equals to their bane severity. If your character rides the wave of their frenzy, you can choose only one feature to manifest, therefore taking only one penalty to your attributes. The Malkavian, you heard Rob talking about them. They are the clan of the moon, the lunatics, the madmen, the jesters, the oracles, the dervishes, the visionaries, the children of Malkov. So if you like to play a character with a little bit of wildness to them, not wildness in terms of the Gangrel, but more of the, socio stuff, you definitely want to dive into these guys. Psychologists would diagnose the children of Malkov with schizophrenia, depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder, or post-traumatic stress disorder, sometimes all at once. In reality, they have all of these things and none. Like the wise madmen of poetry, their derangements stems from seeing too much of the world at once, from understanding too deeply and feeling emotions that are too strong to bear. They self-medicate with blood, but that is just a temporary solution. These guys, when you start to see the vampires start to look a little more refined and elegant, I think. So their bane, they are afflicted by their lineage. All Malkavians are cursed with at least one type of mental derangement. Depending on their history and the state of their mind at death, they may experience delusions, visions of terrible clarity, or something entirely different. When the Malkavian suffers bestial failure or a compulsion, their curse comes to the fore. Suffer a penalty equal to your character's bane severity, 1 to 1 character to one category of dice pool, physical, social, or mental, for the entire scene. This is in addition to any other penalties incurred by compulsions. You and the storyteller decide the type of penalty and the exact nature of the character's affliction during character creation. There's a lot of interactive stuff with your the person who's leading your games, and I really love that. The classic Nosferatu, the horrors, the clan of the hidden, the sewer rats, the lepers, the carnies, the scabs, the vagrants, the orlocks. For the Nosferatu, the embrace is a journey through abjection. For the Nosferatu, the embrace is a journey through abjection. As the blood of the horror gradually deforms the struggling tissues of the human body into grotesque abominations, weeks of pain result in deformities similar to terrible birth defects, cancer growths, crippling injuries, and leper-like sores. Those who endure it find themselves as monstrous echoes of Murnau's silver screen vision. But perhaps pain and humiliation teaches compassion. The Nosferatu, as they jokingly call themselves, are the most humane of the kindred, wearing their curse on the outside rather than the inside. To blend in, some call on the blood to wear borrowed faces of their victims or disappear from sight, while others rely on prosthetics and heavy makeup. These guys are really interesting, and think you could play it almost like a Phantom of the Opera kind of character. It would be pretty cool. Their bane, hideous and vile, all Nosferatu count as having a repulsive flaw and can never increase their rating in the looks merit. In addition, any attempt to disguise themselves as non-deformed incur a penalty to the dice pool equal to the character's bane severity. Most Nosferatu do not breach the masquerade just by being seen. They are perceived by mortals to be grotesque and often terrifying, but not always supernaturally so. After the break on the GSMC Sci-Fi podcast, we are going to continue breaking down the clans. We're going to hear about the Tremors, the Toreadors. It just gets more and more interesting from here.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Melinda Barkhouse-Ross. And then we break into the Toreadors. This is when we start to get the really pretty characters. So the Toreadors, they are the divas, the clan of the rose, the degenerates, the artists, the harlots, the perverts, the hedonists. Cursed by their unbridled sensuality, the divas are obsessed by aesthetic perfection. A fashion model overdosing on a bad batch of heroin, a YouTube clip of a perfectly executed beheading, a dazed eyes of a child who has seen too much, or a reflection of a moon in a pool of blood. These are the kinds of things that make a Toreador lose themselves. They say the first diva finally died in front of their looking glass, unable to tear their gaze away from the image of their face touched by the reflected dawn. But to dismiss the Toreador as wanton perverts or shallow artists is the last mistake a kindred will ever make. Beauty is power, and love can make anyone do just about anything. And that is the promise of the Toreador. They can make even the dead feel something raw, something real. So these are the ones that you want to play if you are looking to play the beautiful vampire. For their bane, Toreador exemplify the old saying that art in the blood takes strange forms. They desire beauty so intently that they suffer in its absence. While your character finds itself in less than beautiful surroundings, lose those equivalent of their bane severity in dice from the dice pool to use their discipline. The storyteller decides specifically how the beauty or ugliness of the Toreador's environment penalizes them based on the character's aesthetics. That said, even devotees of the school never find normal streets perfectly beautiful. This obsession with aesthetics also causes divas to lose themselves in moments of beauty, and a bestial failure often results in a rapt trance, as the detail compulsion rules. The Tremere. I am thoroughly enjoying playing Anna. I wish that I had have looked further into the blood magic that she's capable of, because I do find it a little bit limiting, but they are quite fun to play. So the Tremere clan, the Usurpers, Warlocks, the Thaumaturges, the Transgressors, the Broken Clan, the Blood Witches. A mage in 8th century Romania, Tremere was the leader of the cabal of magic users, rightfully feared for their obsession with the knowledge and power. Able to prolong his life unnaturally for centuries, his powers eventually lessened and his grip on youth became shaky. Unable or unwilling to accept his own mortality, Tremere cast his eyes on the hallowed secrets of immortality. In his greed, the mage instigated more terrifying magical experiments ever conducted, damning himself and his followers to hell for their own making. Thousands of mortals were murdered and hundreds of kindred drained in ritual circles before Tremere and his cultists thought they had found the elixir of life. How surprised they were to have discovered the curse of Cain. Terrified, they died and woke again in an eternity of unlife and hunger, cut off from their craft. In mockery of their former magical rituals, now only fresh blood allows the Tremere to cast their thaumaturgic spells to twist reality. So these guys are really interesting. They actually, once upon a time in the lore of Vampire, they were tied to a very strict organization within the Tremere clan. It was like a pyramid scheme kind of thing. You didn't ask questions of the people who were above you in the social standings. So the Bane, which is described as this for the Tremere, the clan was defined by a rigid hierarchy of blood bonds reaching from the top to the bottom of the pyramid. But after the fall of Vienna, their blood has recoiled and aborted such connections. Tremere Vitae can no longer blood bond other kindred, though they themselves can be bound by kindred from other clans. A Tremere can still bind mortals and ghouls, though the corrupted Vitae must be drunk an additional number of times equal to the vampire's bane severity for the blood bond to form. Some theorized this change is the revenge of the antediluvian devoured by Tremere. Others attribute it to a simple mutation. Regardless, the clan studies their vitae intently to discover if the process can be reversed, and indeed determine if they would even want to do so. So, I mean, they're kind of an intellectual, but they are definitely always on the search for information and that kind of thing. Next up is the Ventru. Almost played a Ventru for the current group that I'm playing with. So the Ventru are the clan of kings, the blue bloods, the tyrants, the warlocks, the bourgeois, the cults of Mithras. In their own eyes, only the clan of kings has the restraint, the wisdom, the control, and the pedigree to lead their kind through the night. Throughout their time as god kings of ancient Babylon and lords and ladies of the Dark Ages, their contemporary roles as guardians of royal blood, majority shareholders and campaign fund backers, they have been obsessed with the impulse to rule. They collect their tithes in the form of precious blood, ensuring the growth of their legacy. While many others claim positions of influence in politics and business, no one can rival the Ventru in the game of pure power and wealth. But lately, their arrogant projections as divinely chosen rulers, better fit to lead than any other clan, have begun to falter. Time is running out as they feel their privileges slipping through their fingers. The Ventru tighten their grip and fight fang and claw to remain in control as the masters of their kind. So these guys are definitely the ones who are, you would consider them like the ruling class. So the bane of the Ventru is this. The Ventru are in possession of rarefied plates. When the Ventru drinks bloods from any mortal outside their preference, a profound exertion of will is required, or the blood taken surges back up in a scarlet vomit. Preferences range greatly from Ventru who can only feed from genuine brunettes, individuals of Swiss descent, to others who can only feed from soldiers or mortals who suffer from PTSD or methamphetamine users. With a resolve plus awareness test, your character can sense if a mortal possesses the blood that they require. If you want your character to feed from anything but their preferred victim, you must spend willpower points equal to the character's bane severity. So while they are very powerful, they do definitely have a flaw. Don't pick something rare, like they can only drink from humans who have one blue eye, one green eye. Don't do something like that to yourself. Just don't do it. Only drink from people with tattoos. That would be a good law for you to have for yourself. So those are the clans that made it into V5. Definitely different than what we've seen in previous editions. I know that we would still be talking, through the majority of the week, just talking about the different clans and what they basically do and what their banes are. Really, I think it's a great insight to a little bit of the game, and I hope that you're intrigued enough to try the game on for yourself and see how you like it. If you have any questions, always reach out on Twitter or any of the social media for the GSMC Sci-Fi podcast. Go ahead and try a vampire on for size. And let us know how it goes. Please do that. Also, if you don't mind, you have some extra time right now. Once you've listened to the podcast, drop us a 5-star review on your favorite listening platform. We would truly appreciate it. Even better if you could grace us with a few kind words. That would be absolutely wonderful. We'd love to hear your feedback anytime. So until next time, for the GSMC Sci-Fi podcast, I'm your host, Melinda Barkhouse-Ross, and we'll talk to you next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.